or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
We hope all those mothers had a wonderful Mother's Day, and especially those who showed love to children not their own. Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the May 11th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Apollo Global Management has been holding talks to sell Mid-Cap Financial Investment, a publicly listed private credit fund that has $3 billion in investments. Crunchyroll, the largest streaming service dedicated to Chinese animation known as anime, boosted its subscriber base nearly 25% in the past year to 21 million. Parent company Sony said. Stellantis said 2 of its factories in Spain would produce electric vehicles with China's Leap motor in a closely watched test case of collaboration. The Devil Wears Prada 2 led the weekend domestic box office, adding $43 million to its ticket haul for a cumulative $144.8 million since release. Saudi Arabia's national oil company said its quarterly profit rose 25% as it increased exports via a pipeline that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. Sandoz chief executive Richard Saynor said the size of the generic weight loss drug market isn't known after the patent on semaglutide expired, opening the door to an expanded field. The European Union is set to roll out long-awaited regulation this year to reduce deforestation across the globe, but a new trade deal with South American countries could test it. After a deal ended a proxy fight between 2 big-name arms makers, Ruger's chief executive said the U.S. market continues to be attractive to Beretta as the Italian company looks for opportunities to grow. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Trump will arrive in China for a meeting with Xi, prepared to push Beijing, which relies on Iran for low-cost oil, to help broker an agreement that ends Tehran's conflict with the U.S. The conspicuous absence of Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is becoming a bigger problem for Tehran as it tries to negotiate an end to the war. Israel set up a clandestine military outpost in the Iraqi desert to support its air campaign against Iran and launched airstrikes against Iraqi troops who almost discovered it early in the war. Passengers from the cruise ship struck by the hantavirus outbreak disembarked in the Canary Islands on their way to evacuation to their home countries. Trump and top aides pressured GOP leaders in South Carolina and other southern states to pursue mid-decade electoral redistricting. The numbers that researchers have used to predict which jobs could be lost to artificial intelligence may be unreliable, and AI itself could be partly to blame, a study found. The NTSB said it was gathering information about the evacuation of a Frontier Airlines plane after it hit and killed a person on the runway at Denver International Airport. A breakaway group of the Pakistani Taliban claimed responsibility for an attack on a security post that killed 14 police officers. Died Bobby Cox, 84, former Atlanta Braves manager. The picture on today's front page shows passengers coming down what appears to be a stairways to an open door, as in the distance there is a small boat waiting. Passengers disembark from the hantavirus-stricken cruise ship MV Hondias in Tenerife, Canary Islands, Spain on Sunday. And that headline reads, Hantavirus cruise passengers head for home as ship docks. MV Hondias arrived in Spain's Canary Islands with no signs of infection. By Lyle Brennan, Noemi Bisserby, and Jennifer Kalfas. The cruise ship at the center of the hantavirus outbreak arrived early Sunday in Spain's Canary Islands, setting in motion a delicate evacuation process designed to end the weeks-long ordeal of those on board while avoiding the spread of a contagion that left 3 passengers dead. The MV Hondias, carrying around 150 people, was anchored off Tenerife, the largest island in the archipelago near northwest Africa, Spain's health ministry said. From there, authorities planned to ferry the people to shore and put them on flights home for quarantine and isolation. None of those on board were showing symptoms as of Saturday, said World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who traveled to the Canaries to observe the operation. Hantavirus is a rare but potentially lethal family of viruses carried by rodents, with different forms attacking the lungs or kidneys. The Andes strain, identified in this outbreak, is unusual in that it can be transmitted from human to human. 8 cases, including the 3 deaths, had been reported as of Friday, the World Health Organization said. Tedros said the Hondias evacuees would be received at the industrial port of Granadilla, far from residential areas, in sealed, guarded vehicles through a completely cordoned off corridor, and repatriated directly to their home countries. The decision to let passengers disperse has stirred anxiety beyond the Canary Islands, but infectious disease doctors told the Wall Street Journal that any fears of a COVID-like situation were misplaced. The group includes 17 Americans and staff from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention were expected to meet them in the Canaries to facilitate their transfer to special quarantine facilities in Omaha, Nebraska. The American cruise ship passengers will be brought to the University of Nebraska Medical Center's National Quarantine Unit, the center said. The 20-bed facility is the only quarantine facility funded by the federal government in the U.S., and its rooms are equipped with personal bathrooms, exercise equipment, Wi-Fi, and special ventilation systems, the center said. It was funded by a nearly $20 million federal grant. The facility looks more like a hotel than a hospital. People quarantined at the center are asked not to leave their rooms and receive essentially room service brought to their door, said Dr. Michael Wadman, medical director of the National Quarantine Unit at the University of Nebraska Medicine. Repatriation flights have been chartered or scheduled to transport passengers back to the U.S., the U.K., Germany, Belgium, Ireland, the Netherlands, and France. Iran war is casting shadow on China summit. As Trump prepares to meet with Xi, he is eager to move on from the Middle East conflict. By Annie Linsky, Alexander Ward, and Gavin Bade. Washington. President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping will have another nation looming over their summit as the heads of the world's two superpowers meet in Beijing this week. Iran. The long-anticipated meeting has been delayed once because of the U.S. and Israel's war against Iran, which has led to the closure of the vital Strait of Hormuz. Trump is eager to move on from the Middle East war that is sapping his domestic power and straining the global economy. He will land in Beijing prepared to push China, which relies on Iran for low-cost oil in their transactional relationship, to help broker an agreement that ends the conflict, U.S. officials said. Xi also wants the fighting to stop as Middle East turmoil restricts China's oil supply and shrinks countries' ability to buy Chinese goods. Finding a solution could expand Xi's stature as a global statesman who swooped in at the precipice of a possible military escalation, analysts and U.S. officials said. Trump on Sunday said a multi-page response Iran sent to the U.S. proposal to end the war, which didn't include commitments about Tehran's nuclear program, was unacceptable. On Friday, Trump had threatened to resume Project Freedom, the U.S.-led operation to help ships navigate the strait safely. Iran is proposing an end to the fighting and a gradual opening of the strait to commercial traffic as the U.S. lifts its blockade on Iranian ships and ports, people familiar with Tehran's response said. Senior U.S. officials insist the crisis in the strait and Tehran's refusal to make nuclear concessions will prove an afterthought once Trump and Xi step into the Great Hall for trade talks. But both men head into the high-stakes summit aligned in seeking their own victories on Iran, with the Chinese particularly eager to ensure the current Iranian regime remains intact so it can recover. At a minimum, Trump will have to keep one eye on a major conflict during a vital engagement halfway around the world. The president is scheduled to land in Beijing Wednesday night and leave Friday local time, giving the leaders 2 days of back-slapping and handshaking. The schedule includes bilateral meetings, a tour of the Temple of Heaven, a state dinner Thursday night, and tea between the two leaders on Friday before Trump departs, U.S. officials said. Trump will have to juggle briefings and updates on two different multifaceted sets of policy issues at once, all while a bit jet-lagged, said Jacob Stokes, Deputy Director of the Center for a New American Security Public Policy think tank's Indo-Pacific program. Trump arguably faces a tight wire act of simultaneous diplomacy and negotiation more complicated than any he's yet seen in either of his presidencies. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Xi hones push for global power. China pours money into AI, EVs, and military, while job market grows bleak. By Brian Spiegel. More than a decade into Xi Jinping's rule, China's military has grown more formidable, its factories dominate global manufacturing, and its technology pioneers are closing the gap with Silicon Valley. Yet big parts of its economy are a mess. A colossal property bust has destroyed trillions of dollars in wealth, consumer confidence has been gutted, and the job market has grown bleak. The disconnect shows how Xi has made China's security a priority over its economy. He is steering hundreds of billions of dollars into pursuing self-sufficiency in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, electric cars, and other strategic sectors, while holding back on economic reforms that would help create more jobs and lift the country's middle class. It is all in service of his vision for national rejuvenation, grounded in military might and industrial strength, a strategy likely to be on full display when President Trump travels to Beijing to meet Xi. In Xi'an, a city about 600 miles southwest of Beijing, famed for its ancient terracotta warriors, the government's last year's slashed spending on maintaining roads and running courts, while increasing it by 80% on science and technology. As city revenues shrank, spending on elementary and middle schools alike dropped by more than 10%, though local military forces received millions of dollars in special funding. In Foshan, near Hong Kong, residents said in interviews that a sense of crisis has descended over the once booming manufacturing hub, where the economy grew by only 0.2% last year. Officials want to transform the city into a center for robotics, but that industry is too small to save Foshan's economy. Today, many factories are vacant, with for rent signs hanging on their facades. China's economy is smaller than many Western economists predicted it would be when Xi took over. Even when adjusting for purchasing power differences between the two countries, China's per capita gross domestic product was less than one-third the size of the U.S.'s in 2024. Under Xi, China can make the economy a victim for his political considerations, said Gu Guangwu, a scholar of Chinese politics at Stanford University. But it can actually never make political considerations a victim of economic development. In his latest annual New Year's address, Xi avoided almost any mention of economic problems. Instead, he stressed that China's national strength had reached new heights. China's belief that its power is rising and that the West is declining has made it more willing to push back when challenged. Beijing moved to limit exports of critical minerals to the U.S. last year during the country's trade war, an escalation that threatened American factories. Its aggressive military maneuvers near Taiwan have increased concerns about a global crisis over the island. In its latest annual assessment of countries' power in Asia, the Lowy Institute, an Australian think tank, still ranked the U.S. as more powerful, but concluded that China had narrowed the gap. High fuel prices seep into the produce aisle by Owen Tucker Smith. Hunts Point, New York. Stephanie Katzman's celery is starting to feel the pinch of $5.66 diesel. Her food distribution company buys fresh stalks from farmers in California and trucks them nearly 3,000 miles to a maze of chilled warehouses in the Bronx. That journey cost $11,000, 46% more than it did for the same trip last year. Workers at the 3 million square foot market, the largest food distribution center in the country, unload the celery and drive it into the city, paying for even more diesel along the way. By the time the celery sleeve arrives at the corner store, it is about 40 cents pricier than it would be otherwise. New York's Hunts Point produce market, perched on a peninsula jutting into the East River, has morphed into a battleground in the food industry's scramble to react to the past year's economic crises. Tariffs, stretched consumers, abnormal weather, and now climbing costs to get their lettuce and lemons from point A to point B, triggered by the surge in diesel prices. The rise in fuel prices affects every part of the supply chain because fuel is used everywhere, said Katzman, chief executive of a distributor that operates out of Hunts Point Produce Market. That's where you really feel a change. Vendors at the market are watching their profit margins dwindle and weighing just how much they can raise prices, well aware that many of their customers are also struggling to get by. AI helps shares of chip firms maintain momentum, by Jack Pitcher and Hannah Aaron Lang. A year ago, investors had all but left Intel for dead. Now the chip maker's shares are going parabolic, notching their first record in 26 years, then soaring past it. Welcome to the great chip stock melt-up of 2026. Intel is up 239% this year. SanDisk shares have surged 558%. South Korea's largest stock index has nearly doubled. And the S&P 500 semiconductor companies have added roughly $3.8 trillion in market capitalization in the past 6 weeks alone. The surge is thanks to AI companies' insatiable appetite for computing power, which has broadened to include all kinds of semiconductors, such as memory chips and Intel CPUs. Chip makers just reported blowout profits and issued rosy forecast for the coming year. Investors have piled in, including some who remember that the last time this happened back in the dot-com era, the bubble eventually burst and many of the stocks never recovered. As the needs of AI companies have evolved Demand for traditional CPUs has increased too, and agents can run 24/7 and generate copious data, increasing demand for memory. Shortages of all kinds of chips are pushing prices higher. Iran's top leader remains absent, vexing negotiators, by Henna Mousavi, Margarita Stankati, and Benoit Falket. Iran's rulers have a problem as they attempt to negotiate an end to the war. Their new supreme leader is noticeably MIA and silent on the talks. U.S. and Iranian officials say Mojtaba Khomeini was severely injured in a February airstrike which killed his wife, son, and father, former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Since then, the only thing Iranians have heard or seen from their new leader are messages purportedly written by him and images that appeared to be modified or generated by artificial intelligence. His absence is becoming a bigger problem for Tehran as it tries to negotiate an end to the war. Iran's rulers have shown unity during the fighting, coordinating their political messaging, and maintaining command and control over their armed forces. But they are fracturing over how far to go to strike a deal with the U.S. Khomenei's protracted absence from the public eye has been particularly unsettling for his hard-line supporters who are questioning the legitimacy of the talks, said Arash Azizi, a historian and lecturer at Yale University who focuses on Iran and has reviewed group chats of hard-line regime supporters. Iran's hardliners have taken aim at more moderate Iranian politicians who are playing a prominent role in talks, most notably Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who they see as too compromising. Israel maintained a secret base in Iraq. Country's Air Force used desert location as logistical hub for support. Staging. By Anat Peled and Jared Malzin. Tel Aviv. Israel set up a clandestine military outpost in the Iraqi desert to support its air campaign against Iran and launched airstrikes against Iraqi troops who almost discovered it early in the war. People familiar with the matter, including U.S. officials, said. Israel built the installation, which housed special forces and served as a logistical hub for the Israeli Air Force, just before the war started, with the knowledge of the U.S., the people said. Details of the base and the risks Israel took to establish it and protect it help fill in the picture of how the country managed to fight an air campaign against an enemy around 1,000 miles away. From U.S. Watch, Colorado. Denver Airport incident is probed. The National Transportation Safety Board on Sunday said it was gathering information about the evacuation of a Frontier Airlines plane after it hit and killed a person on the runway at Denver International Airport during takeoff late Friday. We are gathering information about the emergency evacuation to determine if it meets criteria for a safety investigation, said NTSB Representative Sarah Taylor Sulik. A spokesman for the Denver Police Department said Sunday that the investigation was continuing and that the identity of the person on the runway will be confirmed and released by a medical examiner. 2 minutes after jumping a fence, the person crossed the runway and was hit. The airport said they don't believe the person was an airport employee. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, the stakes of the Trump-Xi summit. The U.S. wants stability, but China has larger ambitions. President Trump visits Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Thursday, and the pre-meeting U.S. spin is a search for stability. It's a nice idea as long as Mr. Trump doesn't think personal rapport can overcome Mr. Xi's anti-American purposes. The agenda ranges from trade to technology to Iran. On trade, the best outcome may be ratifying the status quo, a truce on tariffs, with a promise from Beijing not to hold the world's rare earth supply hostage again, as it did after Mr. Trump's tariff threats last year. Mr. Xi's weak economy is an incentive for him to cooperate, and he'll hope to placate Mr. Trump with promises of buying more farm goods, aircraft, and more. But Mr. Xi has made that promise before, and U.S. farmers have never regained their lost market share in China. Mr. Xi's rare earths ransom offer may be more U.S. advanced chips exports to China. Mr. Xi views artificial intelligence as a decisive theater in Beijing's competition with the U.S., and he is trailing, though not by much. The administration wants talks with Beijing about AI guardrails, and by all means keep the phone lines open. But don't expect much from AI arms control, and the best deterrent is U.S. dominance on models and computing power. Beijing will be happy to make pronouncements about responsible stewardship and then pursue its own interest with little regard for norms or laws. Beijing is engaging in industrial-scale theft of America's AI models, the Trump administration warned this year. And don't forget the Justice Department indictment this year of a technology executive and associates allegedly running a sophisticated operation to divert high-end chips to China. The hullabaloo over the power of the latest U.S. frontier AI models also reinforces the case for withholding AI building blocks from an adversary. Congress is warning Mr. Trump that his political runway is short by moving on bills to tighten advanced chip exports. The Venus flytrap Mr. Xi is setting for Mr. Trump is on Taiwan. Mr. Xi wants veto power over U.S. arms sales to the island, and he is pressing for the U.S. formally to oppose Taiwanese independence, as opposed to the current posture of not supporting it. Mr. Xi will argue the tweak is of no great consequence to Americans and stroke Mr. Trump's ego that he can bring peace to one more troubled region. Yet that change would disrupt decades of U.S. policy that, for all its delicate diplomatic wording, has held the peace. Taiwan is not the aggressor in the Taiwan Strait, a Xi fiction that opposing independence would indulge. Mr. Trump may not care about Taiwan's freedom or its example that a preposterous Chinese democracy is possible. But the president doesn't want a crisis on his watch, which would be an economic and geopolitical catastrophe. Mr. Xi will be looking to see if Mr. Trump suggests he won't defend Taiwan in the clutch. Mr. Trump's diplomacy is above all personal, and no one can predict what he'll do in the room. Japan and others in the region are watching with anxiety. A reminder that U.S. support for Taipei is an interest that informs America's alliances around the world. One mistake would be not stopping in Tokyo in advance of Beijing as a signal of solidarity with Japan. Mr. Trump has said he'll bring up the case of political prisoner Jimmy Lai, but Mr. Xi won't move to release the 78-year-old publisher who was convicted of bogus charges in Hong Kong, unless he believes Mr. Trump's request is more than a token gesture. The U.S. wants China's help on Iran, and it would be an improvement if China at least stopped actively helping the enemy. Retired Navy Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery suggested last week that Mr. Trump should ask Mr. Xi directly if he's helping Iran with intelligence. The larger context for this summit is that the Chinese Communist Party continues to be the main financier and industrial base for the world's bad actors, from Russia to Iran and North Korea. The first Trump administration understood China as a strategic adversary, military, economic, and ideological. The second Trump administration is searching for détente, and Mr. Trump is the chief dove. A détente has some merit if America spends the interlude diversifying its rare earth supply chain and passing a $1.5 trillion defense budget to rearm. Mr. Xi has studied the president and thinks he has trump cards on minerals and pharmaceuticals. Behind the talk of goodwill in Beijing, this reality hasn't changed. Mr. Xi is playing a long game to overthrow the U.S. as the world's leading power. Is Ukraine turning the Russian tide? Vladimir Putin held a subdued Victory Day parade on Saturday in Moscow with fewer missiles and other weapons that are an annual boast about Russia's military power. If it's true that Mr. Putin feared a long-range Ukrainian drone strike, it's one more sign that the tide may be turning against Russia after 4 long years of death. Russian forces are performing worse on the battlefield in spring 2026 than when the Kremlin emphasized its demand for Donetsk Oblast in 2025. The Institute for the Study of War reported on Friday. ISW, which offers the best independent analysis of the war, says Ukraine appears to have regained more territory from Russia's occupiers than it lost in April. Russia has been making grinding progress in Ukraine's east for months, albeit at great cost in casualties. So it's significant if Ukrainian forces are reversing the trend. Ukraine's military says Russia suffered more than 35,000 casualties in April, dead or wounded, which, if even close to true, is also a growing toll. ISW says Ukraine is increasingly able to hit targets deep in Russia with drones and missiles. These include oil production facilities, arms caches, and other military assets, as our Jillian Melchior reported Friday. This explains Mr. Putin's lack of confidence in exposing Russian assets in Red Square. The killing continues, though Mr. Putin said this weekend the war is coming to an end. We'll believe that when we see him end his terror bombing of Ukraine's cities and stop demanding that Kyiv give up more territory that Russia hasn't been able to seize by force. All of this means this is a moment to increase support for Ukraine so it can keep the pressure on Russia. Only the prospect of greater losses and potential defeat will cause Mr. Putin to abandon his imperial ambitions in Ukraine and in Western Europe. That's the best way to end the war on honorable terms that secure peace and freedom for Ukraine. From the opinion pages, all the good from Goodwill. The organization is more than a place to donate your old clothes and furniture. By Andy Kessler, Rockville, Maryland. People come out of prison with no money, no job, not always into a good community. Our re-entry program has a 5% recidivism rate, astoundingly low. Stephen Preston, President and CEO of Goodwill Industries, told me about how they help former prisoners. Goodwill Industries? Like me, you probably think of Goodwill as a place you drop off old clothes and furniture. I've never stuck around long enough to see our donations in action. I had no idea. Mr. Preston sums up Goodwill's original mission: to help every individual develop to their fullest potential. It was founded in 1902 after a Methodist minister and his wife were sent on a mission to the poorest part of Boston. They started knocking on people's doors to ask for clothing so they could give clothing to the poor, Mr. Preston says. And then they had this epiphany: wait, I could clean this clothing, repair it, sell it, turn it into an enterprise, and give these people jobs so that they weren't taking handouts. I could help them develop job skills. Goodwill now has more than 3,400 stores and nearly 140,000 employees. Mr. Preston, a former Housing and Urban Development Secretary, notes, a significant percentage of the people that we employ have either a disability or some other kind of challenge. The organization serves 2 million people a year. Mr. Preston estimates that 83% of the population is within 10 miles of a Goodwill. Since its founding, Mr. Preston says, we've pivoted away from just being hands and feet for people in that place of need to helping people with self-sufficiency and economic mobility to take care of themselves. So the mission hasn't really changed, not for 120 years. But the services have expanded, Mr. Preston says. Stores threw off nearly $250,000 of profits to fund job centers, about 650 of them, which are separate facilities. Another $830 million comes from corporate support, government programs, and philanthropy. One of its prison re-entry programs receive funds from the Labor Department. Sadly, the post-prison recidivism rate can be 40% or more. Goodwill's 5% is partially due to self-selection, but its success comes from being hands-on. A service coordinator provides support and accountability. It's living with you in the day in and day out. Mr. Preston says you might hear my career navigator was Jenny, and let me tell you, she was in my life, and those are absolutely the unsung heroes. A lot of people we serve are coming out of prison, have addiction, maybe even a history of homelessness. Roughly 85% in Goodwill's training programs have a high school diploma or less. So you can imagine that getting a credential in digital skills or trade skills, or just learning how to show up for work every day, deal with conflict, how to be an effective person in the workplace is important. Support is highly localized, which makes it effective. There are 155 local Goodwill organizations across the U.S. and Canada, independent nonprofits. Washington might need child care centers, while Texas needs language skills. Still, there is value to a national organization. We're seeing probably the most rapid transformation of the labor market in human history. How do we build out the capability? We're rolling out programs to train people for clean tech, trade skills, EV charging station maintenance, solar panel installation and maintenance, and heat pump maintenance. We partner with Accenture and companies like General Motors and Lowe's. Everyone talks about job training. Goodwill is doing it. Add healthcare and hospitality and digital skills. Go to goodwill.org and you can sign up for the Google AI Essentials class or AI Prompting Essentials. You get a certificate and can show that to an employer, Mr. Preston says. Goodwill also has a youth program for career advice and mentorship. It's for 16 to 18-year-olds that have mostly had justice involvement or are deemed high risk. We used to call them at-risk youth. Now we call them opportunity youth, almost a preventive version of re-entry. I asked if Goodwill was capital constrained. Mr. Preston nodded. If somebody gave me $100 million tomorrow, I could deploy that in 3 months. That wouldn't only give us the resources to serve more people, but to build a much more coherent, consistent system across more geographies. When I first met Mr. Preston at a conference, National Football League player Damar Hamlin joined the conversation saying, "Growing up, Goodwill wasn't just a place for help, it was a lifeline. My mom would always send me there when things were tough." Thank you. Mr. Preston started to respond, and Mr. Hamlin interrupted. Can we just hug it out? Very emotional. Mr. Preston sums it up. The idea of seeing the dignity and potential of every human being and helping them realize that for a better future has always been what we do. So should we all. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Virginia's gerrymanderer loses in court. State justices void the Democrats' 10-1 map rightly and bravely. The left is wailing and the right rejoicing after Virginia's highest court on Friday threw out a 10-1 Democratic gerrymanderer that voters approved in an April referendum. The partisan implications are real because the GOP might come out ahead now in the 2026 House redistricting wars. Noteworthy, too, is that the rule of law lives in Virginia. When Democrats in Richmond advanced the gerrymander, they were racing to answer Republicans' efforts in Texas and elsewhere, urged by President Trump. But Virginia's Constitution gives redistricting to a bipartisan commission. It also says proposed amendments have to go through the legislature twice, with an election in between, giving voters another chance to be heard on constitutional rewrites. In this case, state lawmakers first approved the gerrymandering amendment last October 31st, shortly before Election Day. By that date, Justice D. Arthur Kelsey writes for the 4-3 majority, over 1.3 million votes had been cast, which was approximately 40% of the total vote for that election cycle. The idea that this satisfied the requirement for an intervening election appears to be wholly unprecedented. Under this theory, Justice Kelsey continues, Virginians who cast early ballots in 2025 unknowingly forfeited their constitutionally protected opportunity to vote for or against delegates who favor or disfavor amending the Constitution. That makes no sense, which is why the court rules instead that the gerrymandering amendment wasn't properly proposed and the April referendum is void. It's a gutsy decision 2 weeks after 3.1 million Virginians voted to adopt the gerrymander, 51.7% to 48.3%. But don't blame the court for this timing. All along, Justice Kelsey says, the state insisted that we cannot lawfully decide this case prior to the referendum. Democrats were betting that if the amendment won at the ballot box, the court would flinch at countermanding the will of the people. Yet, as the majority rightly holds, if the state Supreme Court can't decide the constitutionality of the amendment before the vote, then it has to make the legal call afterward, unless Virginia is going to give up on judicial review. The upshot is that Virginia's midterms will be held under the old House map, which is split 6-5 in favor of Democrats, more or less fairly reflecting the state's purple politics. Throw in Tennessee's new 9-0 map, and the gerrymander scoreboard suggests Republicans are ahead. Yet November could still surprise. The risk of spreading out the GOP voters is that they might turn out to be too thin in some places to deliver all the wins Mr. Trump imagines. Swing districts could swing one way. Then, after 2026, Virginia Democrats might try again, along with who knows what other states. None of this is healthy for competitive two-party politics. Politicians will choose their voters rather than vice versa. Primaries may still be competitive, but the candidates will play to the partisan extremes. Yet even gerrymanderers have to follow the law, and under high partisan pressure, the Virginia Supreme Court got this one right. Iran tests Trump's will to fight. The Iran war has entered its skirmishing phase as the regime spent much of the past week firing at the United Arab Emirates and U.S. forces who returned fire in self-defense. President Trump says the ceasefire endures, but for how much longer can that be while Iran keeps shooting? On Thursday, Iran launched missiles and drones and small boats to attack 3 U.S. warships as they transited the Strait of Hormuz. This was an Iranian attempt to kill U.S. troops, but it was intercepted. The U.S. destroyers exited Hormuz successfully, an important demonstration of the U.S. path through the closed strait. No U.S. assets were struck, Central Command said, adding, CENTCOM does not seek escalation. The same can't be said for the Iranian attackers. The U.S. hit the inbound speedboats as well as military facilities responsible for the attacks, striking Iranian targets on Qasem Island and Bandar Abbas. Iran uses these locations to terrorize commercial vessels and shut down the strait. They trifled with us today, Mr. Trump said Thursday. We blew them away. He advised the regime to hurry up and take the U.S. offer that we reported on last Wednesday. But when pressed on the U.S. strikes, the president called them just a love tap. The Iranian regime called them U.S. aggression, which is rich. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Friday, only stupid countries don't shoot back when you're shot at, and we're not a stupid country. But when the attacks keep coming, Iran also fired missiles at U.S. warships Monday. Is it smart to strike merely the direct sources of fire in reply? For now, the Trump administration is insisting on a ceasefire that Iran ignores. Or will this too be blamed on rogue commanders, allowing the regime's leaders to disclaim responsibility? The U.S. Navy delivered a few more love taps Friday as an F/A-18 Super Hornet disabled 2 Iranian tankers attempting to break the U.S. blockade. Iran's regime has never held up its end of the ceasefire. But by signaling a deep reluctance to restart major military operations, Trump encouraged the Iranians to hold out for better terms. By keeping the ceasefire on life support even now, Mr. Trump sends the same message. But rather than wait for Iran, the U.S. could at least resume guiding commercial ships out of the strait. The regime needs to know it is losing its leverage. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 11th, 2026